Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Work at Home Rockstar podcast. I'm excited for today's episode. We are talking to the president of Junto Global. And what he does is he helps to unlock human potential through peer-to-peer learning. He helps people get set up with masterminds. Very excited about this interview, actually. So we're ready to rock with Parker Harris. Hey, Parker, you ready to rock?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So we always start off here on a good note. So tell me a story of success in your business that we can be inspired by.
Success in my business that you can be inspired by. So I my business started organically, not really as a business, but as something that I needed in my own life. And over a 4-year period, it created some breakthroughs for the people involved as well as myself. And I just got a lot of value from it. And I think that, that's the good news is if we really desire to add value to other people, we will be rewarded for it. And and after doing some soul searching and talking with different mentors and executives at the company that I worked, I realized that I was willing to suffer for this company and this movement and decided to go all in. And it felt like a life or death decision. And it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But now, in a sustainable place and thriving and now traveling the world with my wife.
That's awesome. All in. What did that look like for you?
Going all in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was cutting the umbilical cord of like a 9 to 5 job and really figuring out this world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And was that something that, I mean, I, it's difficult, I think, for everybody really to cut that umbilical cord. But was that something that you had support from your friends and family about, or were you kind of going it alone?
I think there was definitely some moral support to it. And like, I really surrounded myself with other entrepreneurs that were people going through it. But I think that part of the journey of entrepreneurship becomes like learning to trust, in this case, myself, like learning to trust myself and really get in tune with my own gut and, learning how to make difficult decisions.
Yeah. That's really good insight as well, because I mean, oftentimes when you ask someone for their opinion, they are almost thinking that you're asking for permission, and they might even feel responsible if you fail. So oftentimes when you sort of ask around, you don't necessarily get the support that you'd expect from some people. And then on the other hand, like you say, if you surround yourself around people that are actually doing it and going through the same journey, they will definitely support you. And that's a good place to be, right? You can support them as well.
Yeah, I think it becomes like easy to ask for advice from like so many different people because then if we ask for advice, then we're not like we can't be wrong ourselves. But I think something that I learned myself and I've seen a lot of other successful entrepreneurs do is they gather data and get counsel from people that have already gotten the results that they're looking to achieve, but then just using that as data and not really as like truth necessarily and figuring out what's truth for themselves based on their unique situation, their business, and what's working now versus maybe what worked 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point too, because the world is changing very quickly, and you might get success in something 10 years ago that you'd try the exact same steps and you wouldn't necessarily get there using that same tool set, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, business is business, and there's a lot of similarities between different businesses. But I think entrepreneurs are sometimes often unique and different. Like people are unique and different, and have their own skill sets and maybe their own vision and what they're looking to achieve can sometimes be different than like, oh, I want to have $1 billion company and thousands of employees and like raise capital from other people. Like sometimes the journey is different to get to different results.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Some people, when they want to be an entrepreneur, that's not even anywhere near what they want. They just want free time. They just want to be able to control their schedule, right?
Yeah, I think freedom is a core like value that most entrepreneurs have. And I think it's also probably true with like musicians and artists and actors. Yeah, I see a lot of similarities between entrepreneurs and artists in that there's a lot of quote unquote, like it has a low probability of success. But then if we drag it out over a long enough timeline, it's almost guaranteed, right? If it's not something we have to do in 6 months, but we can give it 20 years, eventually we're going to work through the challenges and be successful as long as we don't quit.
Yeah, yeah, because in music and in many of the arts, it's the journey that's what's important, right? It's actually playing the music. It's that's driving you to it. So a lot of times in a business, if you don't have something that you really love doing or that you really that fires you up, that has purpose, all those things, well, then you might not go through all that work to get to the end finish line. um, I have noticed that the entrepreneurs that do get there, they did actually get fired up by the work that they were doing, just the same as an artist would get fired up by the work that they're doing, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The journey piece of it, I think that's just so true of life itself. And I noticed for me, like it's like I said, when I left corporate America to start my own company, it felt like a life or death thing where I had to make this work. And it caused me to be manic in my approach and like really seek to go like fast as possible to hit certain goals. And I heard this idea that's really resonated with me. It's that fast is actually slow, but going slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. And the more that I've slowed down and gone a little bit smoother, I actually spent the time to reflect on what's working and what's not working, and do more of what's working and less of what's not working, and create like a plan and then execute that plan at a consistent pace. The growth was a lot faster than when I was manically going fast.
Yeah, well, that's good insight as well. So now, I mean, not everything goes as planned, and there are some bad notes along the way. So can you share something that didn't go well and how you recovered and how we can recover?
Yeah, let me give you a real answer on this. For me, my business is incredibly personal. It's really bringing together people. And there was a point where a lot of the like people in the community were also my friends, were like there was like a strong personal relationship with. and and sometimes customers leave, and in this case it was like friends leaving. And I took it so personally that I almost like cut off the relationship. Was like, wow, this person, like, you're dead to me. You made this choice. It's a lack of loyalty. And I regret the way that I showed up in that. I think it was very like short-term thinking, and it didn't serve me. It didn't serve them. It didn't serve the company. And it's really not like aligned with my mission. I think at the end of the day, it's like a transactional relationship versus actually being relational in a relationship. And as I've learned from that, um, I've been able to repair some of those relationships and like start adding value and receiving value, and at the end of the day, just caring about the person. But some of those people aren't open to that type of relationship anymore. And it doesn't, and it hurts.
I can relate to that. That's experience. I've been on both sides of that, I believe, over the last, several years. And it is difficult because, a lot of times in business, you will get into business with people that are already friends, and then something happens in the business and it ruins your friendship. And also you make very good friends with the people that are in your business as well. So the friend business, a personal business line gets a little bit weird definitely when you're self-employed, right?
Yeah, I call it a complex stakeholder relationship. um, and I think, like, there's something, like, the way that I think about things is like, no one really deserves anything, right? It's like, we don't deserve what we want. We get what we're willing to suffer for, and no one owes us anything. And you know the more that I seek to add value to other people, like, the stronger the relationships are, versus like resting on the past or resting on like what I have done for someone. And so, there's just some examples that I can think of where I really could have supported someone, and like added value, but I was being selfish, short-sighted, and And I think long term, like whether it's like I think on a spiritual level, an emotional level, on a mental level, it doesn't feel good to show up that way. And sometimes people can be mirrors for us. And I think that eventually happened to me. And I think the next part of that story is that like that, not for me, not to stay in that victim mentality, to not like stay down about it and then assign like myself an identity as part of that, but to like embrace reality, accept what happened and learn from it, and then make new decisions in the present.
So what are some of those new decisions now that you make that can help to alleviate that problem, or is that just unavoidable?
Yeah. No, so the new decisions for me is to be relational, not transactional. To look at things from other people's point of view versus my own point of view, and seek to be less selfish.
So now we've already talked about masterminds, and that is one of the topics that I like to talk about is learning from the best. So let me just ask you like about your experience with learning from mentors. Like, how did you get started? Did you start with a mastermind? Did you hire coaches? All that.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to start attracting mentors into my life as a teenager. I got really involved in different organizations. Like the one that comes to mind for me is called Youth in Government, which was a nonprofit, um, like a nonprofit organization that's goal was to teach democracy to the next generation. And that brought together some really interesting people. And I was like I was alone in that organization. Like I started my own delegation, and I was able to attract some mentors that were just a few years ahead of me, as well as a few decades ahead of me, that really impacted my life and, taught me to take my hat off inside, take my sunglasses off, pull my pants up and just show up a little. I kind of came from a certain type of neighborhood that was a little
Uh-huh.
rough around the edges. And the type of success that I wanted to experience in life was not present in my immediate vicinity. And so I had to seek out mentors at a young age. And then what I realized was when I was a student, it was really easy to ask for that meeting and ask for that help. And it became easier when I leveraged, like when I was seeking to add value to more than just myself. And so what that looked like was like creating speaker events or personal and professional development events where I would bring in an entrepreneur, an executive, an investor to teach, to share their story and to share their wisdom with other students. And that created a lot of opportunity for me. And also I noticed this kind of thing where people that would step into those leadership roles and like do the doing versus just sit passively and absorb the information, they got all of the opportunities. There's like this like 90-10 thing where people in these leadership roles ended up getting multiple job offers. And then, the people that were just sitting there, passively didn't really get as many opportunities. So that was like a really interesting insight for me. And then after I graduated from college, I continued to put these speaker events on both within my corporation as well as outside. And I surrounded myself with people that were like really driven. They weren't lost. They had opportunity, but they were seeking to like continue to level up and grow and succeed. And after organizing a number of those events and creating like a really interesting community of people that would attend them, I started getting more and more benefit from the interaction with peers at the beginning and the end of the event than I did from the speaker. And so I was reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, and he created something called Junto, he called a club for mutual improvement, where he brought together 12 people that were industrious. And I decided to utilize that model with the community that I had created. And it was just magical. Like it's one of those things that it's hard to explain in words. There's actually a science around it now called epigenetics that helps explain how our environment really impacts, the translation of our DNA. And I think this is where knowledge, like we move from like knowing something to applying that knowledge and into like action.
Wow. Wow, that's really, really cool. And I can speak to that as well because I've actually experienced very similar things being in sales organizations where you go to some sort of like conference and you get more out of the conversations before and after than you do from the speaker himself or herself, right? So
Why do you think that
yeah, that's
is?
pretty cool. Well, I think part of it is because you see your peers as more equals than somebody who's up on stage. When I look at somebody up on stage, I think subconsciously or maybe even consciously, I think, oh yeah, they've had a different experience. Like, there's no way I can get to that point. But when you talk to people that are, your peers sitting next to you in the audience, we're both sitting there looking at that guy. And if that person's getting some great success, then I'm like, okay, I want to listen to you. I want to know what you're doing because that's more applicable to me. That's just my thought on it. Is that what you think too? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'm like really interested in this idea of like what's authentically relevant to a person, right? And like, and we can, ask, it's like, hey, what's working for you right now? And it's like, oh, that's really interesting, right? Because we're both really busy people or, have a lot going on. We're trying to go above and beyond in our work, but we're also, need to grocery shop and clean and, date at the time and work out. And it's like, hey, like we don't really have any extra time. Like, what are you doing to get more time? Right.
yeah,
And it's really interesting when someone's like also in the trenches and maybe they're two steps ahead, maybe they're at the same level, maybe they're two steps behind. But I think there's always a way to create value, even at those different levels. And then I think it's like just to nerd out with you for a second, there's something called like Web 3.0, which is like the age of the internet that we're living in now, where basically the internet is talking to each other. It's like through these APIs, these
yeah,
application program interfaces, the internet has become horizontal. And if we look back on it, Web 1.0 was when it was like really only available for these like academics and engineers and elites. It was not like open. And then Web 2.0 was when it started to be democratized, but it was very vertical, kind of like the way you were talking about like being at an event and there was like a speaker and they were like, it's like this top down approach.
hmm,
And then it moved to this Web 3.0, which I described. I think personal development is going through that same transition where 1.0 was, 500,000, 2,000 years ago when a lot of these ideas were only available to the elites, whether that was in
yeah,
government or within religions or they're very rich. And then over time, it started to be democratized. I think Benjamin Franklin supported that effort, Napoleon Hill. And now there's just been this like influx of authors and speakers and people that are trying to share their wisdom, but it still was like in this vertical top down approach.
hmm,
And now I think we've moved to that next stage of personal development, what I call it personal development 3.0, where essentially now it's horizontal and we kind of all know the answers, but there's a difference between knowing and doing. And the difference
yeah,
between those is everything.
yeah. I agree 100%. And yeah, that's a really, really cool way to think about it as well. And I think we're seeing with all the communication. I mean, you're on the other side of the world. We're having a conversation right now. This was not possible. Even 5 years ago, I don't even think. Was it? I don't know. It probably was, but definitely 10 years ago it wasn't. So I think that we have the ability now to connect with people all over the place that are in similar points in their journey and have different perspectives. And I think before it was like you say, I mean, it was a top-down approach. If you didn't align with the person standing on stage, well, then tough luck for you. And I've noticed that different speakers speak to me different ways. And some of them I connect with, some of them I don't. Do you find that as well?
I'm not sure I'm answering your question with it, but it's sometimes I think about like this from like an addiction framework where it's like, we can sit in an audience and be lectured at on why not to drink alcohol or why not to use drugs or something like that. But like, what does that do? Even going to a psychiatrist or going to, an elite coach that specializes in this stuff, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then you can go to an AA meeting, and sit around a group of peers that all have the same problem. And this like vulnerability happens, this
Yeah.
bond of trust happens. And then something inside of us, like it snaps and, people never drink again. And it
Yeah.
didn't cost anything. And it's to me, that's like a peer-to-peer environment versus like that top-down environment. And so I think at the end of the day, this is where education is going. There's a brilliant thought leader in the education space named Salman Khan, who created Khan Academy. And he talks about, utilizing technology within the education system. And it essentially reverses the education system where people go home and they get lectured to through YouTube or, whatever like they watch the video, they're able to pause it, rewind it, and really absorb it. And then they go into the classroom and these pockets of peer, they do the homework in the classroom and students are helping each other. And when one person teaches, two people learn. So the teacher benefits just as much as the person that's receiving the answer. And so I think that this is very human at the end of the day. And I think it's more than an emotional breakthrough or an intellectual breakthrough. I think there's something more visceral and energetic that's transferred in this type of relationship.
Well, we know straight up that doing something is a better way to learn than just listening, right? So, I mean, that definitely, wow, that is a really cool concept. I love it. I'm hoping that.
Hi, it's Mark Mawhinney from Natural Born Coaches, and I want to give two very big thumbs up to Tim Melanson and his Creative Crew agency. I have been using them for a long time, and I am 100% happy. They get the job done right, they're fast, and they let me focus on my business. I don't have to worry about anything. So again, I want to give them two very big thumbs up. I have no problem recommending them. I don't give testimonials for everyone because my name is attached to it, but I gladly do so for Tim and the Creative Crew agency. So use them, you won't regret it, and good luck.
So this is being taught in where? Where do we find out more about that?
Yeah, so Salman Khan did an amazing TED Talk. I think it was in 2011. Bill Gates actually introduces him,
Wow.
and it's a nonprofit. Khan Academy is a nonprofit, and they were testing this out in high schools in California at the time, I believe, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, and this is potentially less popular of an opinion, is the people that are really fighting against this type of transition are teachers, or maybe more accurately is the teachers union, right? They just kind of like it the way it is and think that it's working. So
That's surprising. I
it
know a
is.
lot of teachers and they don't think it's working. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm.
So I think that there is some models for us to look at for how we can do it better. And I think it's this combination of utilizing technology and then allowing students to teach themselves, to like do some peer-to-peer learning, and then bring in mentors that can really share information that's authentically relevant to the students, where it's not like no
Yeah.
longer like, why am I learning this? Why is this important? Like, I think we need to, start with why. Like people need to understand why it's valuable to them to learn it, or even choose what is valuable to them, and then connect them to the right resource, the right person, the right experience that's aligned with their why and their goal.
Wow. Well, one of the topics we were going to talk about is practice makes progress or practice makes perfect. And this kind of comes into a line with that. I mean, uh, like, is there anything that we can add on that topic from what we just talked about?
Can you clarify that question?
So what the next topic was going to be practice makes perfect, but it seems as though we just talked about that. And because I mean a lot of the application, but is there anything else maybe even in your own personal life or your business life where like are there routines, are there ways that you get good at what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think people that are driven or ambitious and maybe have a growth mindset is kind of like my frame on it. There's naturally this like goal setting, like desire to set goals and like plan for the future. And that's where I was there for a long, long time. And, And I think that for me, the keystone to really good planning and goal setting is actually in reflection and looking back. And for me, the way I look at it is like gathering data. Let's build this rhythm of essentially reflecting on what happened, creating a plan for what we want to happen, and then executing that plan. And then whether it's every 3 days or every week, I would say like, let's let go of the year or the month, or remember that medium term reflection piece. But like, all right, I said this was going to happen in the last 3 days and it didn't. Like, why not? Like, what worked? What didn't work? What did I fail at? What am I learning from this? And how would I rate, this period of time on a 1 to 10 scale, and do that on a consistent basis. And then every month, every year, every quarter, start to look back on that data to look for trends. So that's one thing that has really moved the needle for me. When I started doing this, I was doing this on a weekly basis, and I looked back over 50 weeks, and I was like, wow, I did not have 1 week that was above a 6, like on a 1 to 10 scale, like not a single week. That's like really interesting, right? And let me look at like, what did I fail at? What am I learning? What were my key lessons? And I was able to like really see a few things very clearly that then over the next 6 weeks, I didn't have a single week below a 9. So
Wow.
I think entrepreneurs, what gets measured gets managed. And a lot of times, the only thing we're measuring in life is, is our weight or our bank account, and maybe not even doing those things, very consistently as well, and gleaning the wisdom or the patterns from that, I think makes us a better craftsman.
Right on. And I mean, I've experienced this process a few times as well, where you say you're going to do something, and then it ends up not getting done. And then why do you think people have hard time saying what they're going to do, like writing down these goals?
I think instant gratification is a pretty powerful thing. And delaying gratification and doing like suffering for the things we really want, and like really doing the volume of what it takes to do it. Like, I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I want 20% more, or like whatever it is, right? Or like, I want to lose this amount of weight, or I want 20% more money, or whatever it is. But in order to do that, we have to do 10 times as much or 100 times as much. It's not just doing 20% more. So I think people tend to think very linearly, and I think growth is non-linear often.
Yeah, I think also we tend to like, I keep on hearing this thing, don't want to get my hopes up, that kind of thing, right? And you don't necessarily put what your goal is going to be, because then if you don't get it, then you feel depressed or whatever it is, right? You think that might have something that maybe there's a psychological aspect of it?
Maybe. I tend to not think with a lot of like hope in mind. I'm pretty much like a make it happen person,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of times we judge success on lagging KPIs, whether it's like, a lot of times the way that goals are set, it's the output versus the input.
Yeah.
And as I've started to set more like input goals and like the leading KPIs, and I think one of the biggest challenges is most people don't know what they have to do to hit that goal, right? It's like, it's easy to have the goal, but it's a lot harder to know what we need to do and do those things every day to achieve that goal.
Yeah. And just if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, like it would be the difference between setting a sales goal versus a number of calls goal. If you're saying, oh, I want to make 3 sales tomorrow, well, that's a great goal, I guess, but how do
Everybody
you
wants
get
to make 3
there?
sales tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the other hand, if you say I'm going to make 10 calls, that's something that's in your direct control. And like you said earlier, I mean, if I write down on my piece of paper, I'm going to make 10 calls, and then tomorrow I look at that and I go, oh, I didn't make 10 calls. It's pretty clear you didn't make 10 calls, and you could have. But if I say I'm going to make 3 sales, it's easier to brush that away. Well, I made 50 calls and I didn't make any sales. Like, next thing you know, you're going to say, well, tomorrow I'm going to set a goal to make 2 sales. Like you have these decreasing goals if you do it that way, right?
Yeah, I think what you said is often how people learn this lesson. I think salespeople are one of the first to like learn the leading versus lagging, because it's so cut and dry and like easy to measure it. I also, not to continue to bag on the education system, I think that the education system can set us up for failure, or doesn't. Maybe a better way is like doesn't prepare us as well, whether it's being a rock star or whether it's being an entrepreneur or a salesperson. Like if you think about the failure rate associated with those type of callings or those type of professions, it's so high, right? Like I think the last statistic I saw was that 95% of small businesses don't make it, like fail within 5 years, or just businesses fail within
Yeah.
5 years of starting. If you think of baseball, right? Like the best baseball players in the world fail 70% of the time. Like they're, to get to the Hall of Fame, you need a 300 batting average. I'm not a musician or an artist, but when I study those stories, it's usually just fraught with fail, even being an actor, right? Or an actress. Like it's just, there's so much failure that when we come from a system that desires that 100% or that it's like, it's very difficult to have the emotional bravery and the courage and just the grit to get through that significant amount of failure. Even the best salesmen in the world, right? They have like a 30% conversion rate. So that means they're failing 70% of the time. And as someone that sells, I still can take it personally. And I'm like, oh, no more. Like I just, tap out. But it's like, that doesn't serve me. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I find is really interesting with like the money game is I think the people that make the most money are the people that are willing to experience the most amount of failure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about money then. So how do you manage your cash flow? Like what are some tips that we can make sure that we have more coming in than going out?
Yeah. I mean, I think that starts with measuring it, and I think that's something, money is often can be a very emotional like thing for an individual. It was for me for a long time where like I like didn't even want to look, at whether it's a credit card statement or a bank statement or like even the financials. It was something I did at the end of the year because I had to for tax purposes. Now I measure it on a daily basis. And measuring that on a daily basis, it becomes very visceral, and I think it goes back to the instant gratification piece too, is often instant gratification is the most expensive thing. And, delayed gratification is where the gains come from. So, I think it becomes like a matter of changing our relationship sometimes with money and also changing the pattern of measuring. I don't even think monthly is enough. I know a lot of corporations do like month-end close or whatever, and they have their reasons for doing that. But yeah, as an entrepreneur, for me, measuring my net worth and cash flow on a daily basis, something happens with my relationship with money where it doesn't become as fun to spend. And I think at the end of the day, there's this change in mindset from spending to investing, right? And it's like, I no longer even enjoy spending money. I enjoy investing money, and I enjoy that investment paying a return that then will impact my cash flow in a positive way. And really like having, like knowing what that is and figuring out how that impacts my life, my lifestyle, my impact, and, the people important to me.
Love it. Yeah. And so now, why do you have a good relationship with money?
Yeah. You might have to ask me that one more time. There's one other thing that I should have just said it. It'll come back to me. But why do I have a good relationship with money? I think part of it has just been willing to like continue walking the path. And I also surround myself with some incredible people that do have a good relationship with money, for whatever reason, that have been able to share their wisdom with me. So I think that can highlight some of the benefits of a mastermind. And I think another idea that has been valuable to me is like walking people out of my life that aren't like serving me or we're not heading that same direction. So, that's something that also comes up as well.
Yeah, that's super difficult too, especially if it's people that have been very close to you for a very long time, right?
Yeah. It definitely is challenging. I think sometimes it's just that pain and pleasure. And when the pain, becomes more than the pleasure of keeping the relationship, it's something that's naturally happens. But I think that sometimes people don't have the difficult conversation and they kind of just ignore or exit. And I don't think that that necessarily supports either one of those people. Maybe it
No.
does. But what I've noticed from going through that journey in those conversations is that some of those people can re-enter my life in the future. And they'll be grateful, right? I think it's part of leadership is leading by example sometimes. And
Yeah.
then that can be a wake up call and shift people into a new place.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable because I've noticed the same. I mean, people follow leaders, right? They don't follow followers. And, if you're making a decision that you're going to be, more responsible with your money, more responsible with your health or whatever it happens to be, and you're going to make these different choices, you might be surprised because the people that are holding you back, quote unquote, they may be waiting for you to lead. And, I've definitely experienced that in my life, and I've seen it, in other people's lives as well, where they've been on this bad path for a long time with this person, and then they make a change, and that person follows them and ends up passing them, right? You know?
Yeah. And then potentially pulling them up in the future. Right. And it becomes this amazing, visuals like climbing a mountain. And sometimes one person's getting pulled up and sometimes they're walking together and sometimes the other person's pulling them up.
Yeah.
I think, you mentioned earlier, like the mindset piece being, sometimes easy and maybe the tactics and strategies being the hard part. For me, it was the opposite. I think the mindset piece was more challenging. And then once I got the right mindset, some of the tactics and strategies like either found me or I already knew them. And I think one of the biggest challenges I see in the world and maybe just within my own life and my own family is like a victim mentality, a survival mentality. Like I grew up and my father was said to me like point blank, he was like, plan A is to survive and have a good time, instant gratification. Plan B is to survive. Right. And it came from a good place for him because he grew up without a dad and slept on the couch and joined the military when he was 17 and was in dependency for a lot of it. And so he was just like, I'm never going to be dependent again. And I'm going to survive on my own. And that was his, generational, like uplifting us as a family out of dependency. And I got to grow up in that survival place. And then I got to look ahead of that and being like, what does thriving look like? What does success look like? And like, I'm looking around and I don't see it. So I have to go find it. And so that led me to move out when I was in high school and like go find another path. And so sometimes I think this like larger journey of success and self-actualization and transcendence and Maslow's, hierarchy of needs is sometimes not just like a single person's journey. Sometimes I think it's like a multi-generational journey. And, we have to figure out where we're at in that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify what I said earlier about the mindset versus the tactics, is that I think that if you have the mindset, you will find those tactics eventually, but you're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes in the process. And so, what we were talking about is the inception of this podcast is that I wanted to tackle the tactics directly to try to save time, because the people who have the mindset are looking for these tactics right now, right?
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that. I think the mistakes are an important part of the journey too, and often judging ourselves on the mistake. And I spent so much time doing this. That's why I can see this is like judging myself for that mistake and then assigning that to my identity and thinking that because of these mistakes that I made, I couldn't be who I want to be in the future. I was essentially creating a false narrative for myself that was playing out and keeping me in this like downward spiral. And when I got clear on what the story was that I was telling myself, and was like able to look at it and be like, is this story true? And it's like, no, probably not. Like I'm still young. If I keep on believing it's true, it's true. But if I start rewriting that story and and make it one that serves me, my identity can shift. And that again is moving from that victim mentality to a hero's mentality.
Wow. So it's time for your guest solo. Tell me what's exciting in your business right now.
I remember what I was going to say earlier. Do you mind if I just jump one thing into?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
This came up on the cash flow piece of it, was doing more with less. I think that that's something that, like there is so many resources out there that we already have at our fingertips that 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, wasn't even possible, whether it's social media or YouTube or, I think libraries were one of the first like iterations of this, right? Where it just like democratized information and resources for people. But I spent so much time just like wanting to do more and like do more. And then I've had a realization recently where it's like, no, just do what I'm already doing better. And so those are kind of two paradoxical ideas that I think can really contribute to more cash flow and better cash flow management for people.
Nice.
So
yeah, I agree with you.
Thanks, Tim. All right. What's exciting in my business? So we've been in business for 10 years now, and we're at a point where Frank Kern, who's a brilliant like online marketer and just online business owner, has this saying, like every 6 months you should you double your prices and fire half your customers. And it hasn't been quite linear like that for us, but after really wanting to go broad and serve everyone, because I really believe in peer-to-peer learning, we've really narrowed down on who we serve and how we serve them and seek to be the best at the world at what we do. And that's created a lot of viral growth where our members refer people that they know that they think that would be a good fit for our community and our mastermind. And so last week we got 13 referrals just from our existing members. And we're in the process of launching a new mastermind and new forum. And that really excites me, the possibility of serving more people. I get to see the impact that this has on someone's business in terms of like growing revenue as well as like increasing profitability. And I think those two things are great. I also get to see this other side of it where they get to enjoy their business in a way that maybe they weren't enjoying it before, kind of getting to that point of burnout, maybe feeling like they were in a silo and potentially not enjoying the journey anymore. And sometimes like Mark Twain has this quote that really stuck with me. It was, it's not what you don't know that's going to hurt you. It's what you know that isn't so. And I think masterminds are an environment where we can get challenged around what we know that isn't so. And because it's that horizontal environment where there's a certain level of vulnerability and trust and people really understand what we're going through and have our best interest in mind, those challenges come from a place where we can hear them and maybe make a shift that's just a 2-degree shift that ends up making all of the difference in the destination that they're going. And so it impacts the business, like I mentioned, but I also see then that starts rippling out into their health, into their family, and just into their own life and lifestyle that they get to live.
Wow. So who would be the best, who would get the most out of one of your masterminds or working with you?
Yeah, I mean, so long term, we really hope to get this into colleges and high schools. And I also have mentors that are in their 60s and 70s and are like, Parker, I don't have 10 people that I can talk to about the things that most matter to me. And I'm a millionaire and I still have dreams, right? And I think I think we live in this, this world of hyper connectivity, but a lack of true connection, sometimes to other people as well as ourselves. Yeah. So at the end of the day, like we serve people with a growth mindset that are really on their hero's journey. Because of the price point and the level of investment, we're usually looking at like high earners that are really committed to be in a fundamentally different place. They're experiencing something in their life where they're like, something has to change, right? And I feel stuck, and I know there's got to be I know that there's a way to level up, or I know there's a way to make things different, but I just don't know what that way is. And all of a sudden they're a little bit more open to getting the answer or hearing the answer that maybe is already within them sometimes too. So we really serve entrepreneurs that are doing at least multiple six figures, up until about 10 million in revenue is kind of our sweet spot, and are committed to growing their business and growing their profitability, and also interested in like holistic goals. So it's not just about money, but there's often, a desire for personal development, health, better relationships, and having a positive impact on the world.
Wow, love it. So how do we find out more about it?
You can go to our website. It's junto.global. That's junto.global. And I'm also pretty active on social media, where I try to share some of the wisdom that our community discusses and creates.
Love it. I love it. This has been a lot of fun. I loved rocking out with you today, Parker. This has been great.
I appreciate being able to be a rock star with you for the day.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks to the rock stars as well as who are listening. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and comment, and we'll see you next time on the Work at Home Rockstar podcast.